To introduce our next honoree, please welcome Francis D'Souza.
I'd like to start by thanking the Bay Area Council and all of you. We are very lucky that we get to live and work in the Bay Area. It truly is a special environment, and I want to thank all of you for the work you do to help create the environment that we're in. So thank you for that. I'm Francis D'Souza. I'm the CEO of Illumina, and it is a huge honor and privilege for me to introduce our next honoree, John Thompson. I've known John over the last 15 years as sometimes a boss, many times a mentor, and always a friend. And even in a valley of larger-than-life pioneers, John is truly a giant. John is a visionary. He can see through complex problems. He sees things that, frankly, no one else can see, and he can plot a path to get to where we want to go. It's the work John did first at Symantec and then through his investments that largely helped create the IT security industry as a whole. And it was his vision that helped drive that over the last couple of decades. John's fearless. When he sees the vision, he boldly goes after it. John led the search committee at Microsoft that helped appoint a lesser-known candidate compared to the big names that people were looking at, Satya, as the CEO, a really big move that has played out fantastically. John's bold decision-making has helped us at Illumina and helped us launch earlier this year the world's first blood test that can detect 50 types of cancer across all stages. It was John's decision-making that helped us work through the challenges to get there. To say John's a people person is a huge understatement. You can see that in his extraordinary relationship with Sandy, as my daughters say, #relationship goals. But you can also see that in the loyalty John has from the customers he serves across the businesses he's run, from the employees that work for him, including me. And you can also see that tremendous empathy and generosity with the way John and Sandy engage in the communities they live and their giving efforts, primarily focused on children and the underserved. But most of all, you can see that John is having fun all along the way, from his contagious chuckle to his winning wink. You know John is having a good time. And I can attest to that even when John is disagreeing with you as your boss, you will still be laughing and still feel like $1 million. So thank you very much, John. With that, congratulations. This is well deserved. I know all of you will enjoy learning a little bit more about John through the video. So thank you.
John Thompson knew very little about the high-tech industry in the early 1970s when he joined tech behemoth IBM as a junior salesman. But he loved business and had a knack for selling. Over the next 28 years, Thompson leveraged his keen skills in selling, building teams, and connecting with people to become one of IBM's most valuable and successful executives, leading a $37 billion sales unit responsible for 45% of the company's revenues and 60% of its profits. Although he was a devoted company man, Thompson also knew he was destined for something more, something bigger.
The status quo is no longer acceptable. We must change, we must transform, and we must engage technology in that process.
That opportunity came in the late 1990s when Thompson was tapped to take over an underperforming consumer software company based in Silicon Valley. With a relentless focus that has been his hallmark, Thompson's leadership at Symantec over the next 10 years transformed the company into a global software and internet security giant.
It was the most exciting period of my 46-year career.
Revenues exploded from $600 million annually to more than $6 billion. The workforce grew to 5,600 in more than 30 countries, and Symantec's stock outperformed its competitors and most other blue-chip tech companies. His wild success at Symantec would cement his place as one of the tech industry's top CEOs and position him for his next role as Bill Gates' successor as chairman of Microsoft, where he helped hire a new CEO, guided the company's shift to the cloud, and reclaimed its title as the world's most valuable. Among the first African Americans to reach such heights in the tech industry, Thompson was celebrated as a trailblazer. it wasn't a label he necessarily embraced.
That experience at IBM taught me the foundational issues of how important diversity is, how important it was to not just have people of color, but women, how important it was to not just have women, but to have a cross-section across all of the divisions or operating units of the company.
Thompson experienced his share of racism and discrimination, both in his personal and business life. But he never fashioned himself an activist and wasn't comfortable framing his success in terms of race. So he found other ways to make a difference.
Life is about lifelong learning. You should be positioned where every day you learn something different.
A voracious learner, Thompson strongly believed that education was key to creating and expanding career pathways for people of color and others, and that business could be a powerful vehicle for creating leadership and other opportunities for women and people of color. He and his wife, Sandy, have been major supporters of numerous organizations focused on expanding and improving educational opportunities and outcomes, particularly in underserved communities in the Bay Area and across the country. Their philanthropy also extends to a range of housing, conservation, and environmental causes. More recently, motivated by the killing of George Floyd and the resulting racial unrest, Thompson has become more outspoken on racial issues and uses his platform as a venture capitalist and board member to mentor youth on navigating the business world.
Change is going to come when the business community of this country stands up and says, time out, we've had enough. It's time to do things differently.
While his days as a CEO may be over, maybe, Thompson remains an active, powerful, and influential force in Silicon Valley and across the entire tech industry for his vision, leadership, and laser-like focus on solving big challenges.
15 years from now, we will be further along than we achieved in the last 46. I'm convinced of that.
Well, I have to admit, I never expected this. Sandy and I arrived here in Silicon Valley in April of 1999. And it was an eye-opening moment for me because I had spent 27 years, 9 months, and 13 days at IBM in a cocoon, where in that cocoon I grew from being the first African-American salesman in Tampa, Florida, to running the most profitable business in IBM 27 years, 9 months, and 13 days later. Candidly, I never expected that. But by the same token, I worked my butt off to do that. And guess what? Along the way, 30 years ago, I got a wonderful partner to help me along this journey. And I'll never forget when the opportunity to join Symantec came along. I had been looking for opportunities in tech in the Valley for a couple of years. And lo and behold, along comes this opportunity that says, gee, should you be a CEO or should you be a head of marketing and sales? And I finally concluded I should be aspirational. I should aspire to be a CEO. So I called the search firms and said, don't show me any jobs that are marketing, sales, or anything else. Just show me a CEO opportunity. And sure enough, along comes 3 months, 4 months later, a chance to lead Symantec. I had run the enterprise business for IBM for 27 years, 9 months, and 13 days. What the hell did I know about consumer? But it was a chance. And guess what? My belief was if you didn't get to be a CEO before you turned 50, you were done. And I got to be a CEO at Symantec 10 days before I turned 50 years old. Needless to say, it was a wonderful journey. It was a chance to be a part of a great, great region, if you will, but it was also an eye-opening moment for me. Because when I arrived at Symantec, we had virtually no black employees. We had one female leader at the senior leadership team level, and we didn't have any aspirations whatsoever to make the company more diverse. Well, that was not who I was and what I was about, but that was not my number one agenda. It was all about improving the performance of the company and along the way, attracting the right talent. And the first person we attracted to the company was a female HP engineering leader who became the leader of Symantec's enterprise group. Needless to say, along my journey now for 50 years in the tech industry, this has been an important element, but never more important than right now, and never more significant to all of us in what we think about in our industry and our company as creating greater diversity, both ethnicity and gender diversity across the board. So thank you very much, guys. I'm very, very honored.
So I'm really looking forward to this conversation between our chair, Kaushik Rajagopal, and John, I'm really interested to hear about what the future of technology has to hold.
Sure. John, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Let's start off with the range of roles you've played, which we heard about. You've been a distinguished CEO, and you're now spending time as an investor and as a board member. What does the investor, board member self you are today, what advice would you give to your CEO self and to the business leaders in the audience?
Well, when I was starting my transition out of Symantec, my view was that I would become an investor, and I would invest in early stage companies, and I would be an advisor or a board member along the way. Well, along the way, I invested in a little company, and that ended up becoming chapter 3 of my career, where I ran a startup for 6.5 years after running a big part of IBM and Symantec and so on and so forth. And I think the real issue for me at that point was, gee, what do I do next? And I concluded that I don't believe in retirement. I don't believe in not having an active, mentally engaged life. And therefore, there's got to be a chapter 4. And as a result, I joined Lightspeed Partners some almost 4 years ago now. And it's been an interesting journey. And oh, by the way, there will be a chapter 5. I don't believe in retirement. Let me be clear. I don't believe in retirement. Sandy. Because I just don't think, my mother was a school teacher, and she had this philosophy about life, which was life is about lifelong learning. And that has stuck with me from, well, 73 years almost now. And the issue, quite frankly, is if you don't believe in that, then you just atrophy. And therefore, I believe every day when I get up, there ought to be something new that I can learn and be excited about. If there isn't, then I ought to shift gears. But I expect to live to be 144 years old, and therefore this notion of retiring at this point in my life makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Excellent, well said. And your point about lifelong learning, I'm sure, is an inspiration to all of us. As we saw in the video, you've been increasingly vocal about the cause of racial justice and equity, and also you've been a role model in broadening opportunity for women, for people of diverse backgrounds. What counsel would you have for all of us in the kinds of things we should be doing to promote and advance those causes?
I guess, as I alluded to earlier, it was a bit of a shock to me to realize how much lack of diversity there was in Symantec, much less Silicon Valley, when I arrived here in 1999. And while that was not my early focus, it ultimately became an important part of who I was and what I wanted to do during my time here in the Valley. And so driving every leader I knew, every company I knew, to do more to create a more diverse workforce, not just at the entry level, but up and down the line, became critically important. And I'm proud of what Microsoft has done. Their female and gender and ethnic diversity has improved substantially over the last 3 or 4 years. However, if you were to look up and down the line at entry versus top, that's the problem this industry needs to figure out how to solve. And it's as much about having more people coming in and candidly having programs and issues in larger companies where you can accelerate the maturity, if you will, of these people who come in from lower level jobs. If I look at my career in IBM, 27 years, 9 months, and 13 days, I had probably 35 or 40 jobs, because they were all about, at that moment in time, promoting the idea of diversity and inclusion. And the Valley needs to become more focused on that for sure, in my opinion.
And on the subject of the Valley and the Bay Area, we've endured some dark moments during the pandemic. We've seen some iconic companies move headquarters out of the Bay Area. On a day like this, it's impossible to not be optimistic, so we might say that the rumors of the death of the Bay Area have been greatly exaggerated. But I'm curious, what's an objective view from you on where Silicon Valley and more broadly the Bay Area stands and what the future holds?
Well, Silicon Valley is all about tech. And candidly, tech is all about human capital. And so the companies in the Valley are going to move to wherever they think they can attract the most capital. And so if it's Austin, Texas, or Boston, Massachusetts, or you pick where it might be, that's what it's all about. And so I think what Silicon Valley has to come to terms with is what makes us unique or distinctive. And quite frankly, given the educational system or network that exists here in the Valley, it's hard to find that anywhere else in this country. And so I just don't think that the Valley's going to atrophy like Boston has or some other places. But by the same token, we need to wake up to the notion of the cost structure for employees, for companies in this part of the world. I mean, we've got entry-level employees in the Valley that are, I made $9,000 a year when I joined IBM. $9,000 a year. It's not, now that was 50 years ago, so let's not kid ourselves. But it's not uncommon for an entry-level employee, undergraduate, coming out of college, to make $125,000 to $150,000 a year here in the Valley. And so what we've got to do is figure out how do we make sure we manage the cost structure of the company while we do all we can to attract the best talent available. And that's the real challenge for this industry, in my opinion.
And as a technology leader and with a vantage point as an investor and now as a board member of the world's most valuable company, what's one or two predictions you would have for what technologies make you optimistic about the future? Whether it's dealing with our challenges in medicine or climate change, if we were in this room 10 years from now, what are one or two predictions you'd make about the state of technology and how it's changing the world then?
Well, I don't think any of us would have ever imagined in 1984 that relational databases would rule the world, that they would hold the predominance of the data that every company and many individuals have. And I think if we were to page forward now 20 years from now, it's likely to be artificial intelligence and machine learning. Because all of a sudden now, this is technology that has the potential to be able to change the world. And if we're not willing to accept the fact that technology is going to change the world, then it won't. And we were in relational database, and I think we have to be around AI. However, by the same token, I think we have to be thoughtful about public policy. because if we're not careful, AI can be a very, very significant problem for you and me and everyone else in this room. And so how the policies evolve around that as it becomes so prominent in the industry and the world becomes critically important for all of us.
An optimistic prediction and a reminder of our obligation.
That's right.
Thank you, John, for joining us.
Thank you.
Congratulations.